out and is doing his level best to help you. But thank you once again to Higher Heights Church UK for all of the incredible work that you're doing. Isaac, I know some people have got on and are helping out with other things. I saw that there was it was like a car boot sale going on outside. There was a lot of clearance activities and so on. So well done to all the volunteers that are doing that, by the way, because while the likes of me can sit comfortably on a chair and we're here to not only speak but also to gain knowledge, I know that we've got wonderful volunteers who are helping out with the sound system every week or who are helping out in other activities. Please keep doing what you're doing. Keep volunteering in the community, because that is how we make our community a united community wherein we all pitch in to make it a better place. Slough is incredibly diverse. I am very, very proud to be a member of parliament from one of the most diverse places in our country. A place where more than 100 different languages are spoken. People from around the world are here. Slough, in fact, is a microcosm of the world, where we have a mingling of cultures. And we, as a town, are enhanced by that experience. And let nobody talk the town down. Let nobody think that we are behind anybody. In fact, when you were going through the education issues earlier, you should be very, very proud that our town, Slough schools, are some of the highest performing schools in the entire country. Consistently, every year, we have been on a regular basis in the top 10. In fact, just 2 or 3 years ago, we were second in the entire country based on GCSE and A-level results. I know the same experience might not be for everybody. There are some schools that were better performing than others, but overall, we are blessed to be living in Slough, and we are blessed where such schools are there, and wherein also we are a huge business hub. So Slough is an incredible engine for the UK economy, wherein we have more UK headquarters, so more UK corporate headquarters in this small town of Slough than Scotland, Wales, or Northern Ireland. That means that our young people have access to some of the top firms, some of the top jobs, right on their doorstep. That Slough trading estate, for example, in Seagrove, so when our kids get educated and when they go off to university, hopefully they will come back to Slough rather than going off to London or wherever else, or New York or whatever. They will come back, and that trading estate, which is the largest singly owned trading estate in the whole of Europe, more than 400 acres along that Bath Road, all of that, that's just one trading estate. But that is the largest singly owned trading estate in the whole of the European continent. So be very, very proud of the town. I know that there are issues, as in many places, whether it's with regards to antisocial behavior from a small number, whether it's in terms of crime, whether it's where certain things that we are not happy with, but it is our collective job to work on those issues. Wherever you see a problem in your locality, please do email me. I'll make sure that the police and other people in authority are then taking action accordingly. But if something is serious, please do report it directly to the police. But my job, as I said, is to ensure that we are working collectively and proud of our multicultural community. Thank you once again for your kind invitation, and all the very, very best, whether you are well settled here, whether you're here on a worker visa, whether you are a parent trying desperately to make sure that the kids stay on the right track, that they are driven to achieve the best in education and sports, so that they are even better, like I said, than us. To all of you, thank you, and may God bless you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Let's appreciate our area MP. We can do better than that. All right, anyone who has a question for area MP, because he's just about to leave, we could give a minute or two for anyone who has a question. Please raise your hand. Yep.
So much for your talk. I had a chat with our mutual friend John, and we had a question regarding the issue that we're seeing with sponsors losing their licenses. The situation it's creating is essentially many migrant workers are being rendered either illegal or not secure. And the reason this happens is the rules for sponsors are actually more complex than people realize. Many employees, out of no fault of their own, then find themselves sadly without status. So it's all well and good trying to focus the conversation on immigration around the boats and illegal migrants crossing the channel. But what we are seeing is every company on average has sponsored more than 50 employees. If 10 of those companies in Slough lose their licenses, you have 500 people, not counting the dependents, who suddenly are not secure. What do you think what can be done about this?
Yeah, Kevin, an excellent question, and I would expect no less from our resident expert on such matters. And look, as I said earlier in my speech, I'll touch upon both those issues. Firstly, in terms of some MPs, especially within the current government, when they're constantly talking about small boats, small boats, small boats, the majority of the issues around immigration aren't around the small boats, and what they shouldn't be doing is just stigmatizing those individuals who are risking life and limb to come through the channel on rubber dinghies and other boats. But that is where the narrative is becoming toxic, that they are constantly focusing in on those individuals rather than, like I said earlier, with regards to the certificate of sponsorship issues with employers, with employees, and when whether it's an employer or whether it's a college or institution that then loses its license, that has a devastating impact on individuals. And those are some of the issues that I have faced when people have come to me to see me at my advised surgeries. And by the way, any of you as constituents can come to see me 5 times a month when I hold those MPs advised surgeries, including one on a Sunday morning. I've just had one earlier. I know many of you attend church on a Sunday morning, but you could also come to one of my advised surgeries on that Sunday, but there are also others that I held on Friday. And when individuals have come to see me directly, that's what they have been distraught, because what they're saying is, now look, I don't have recourse to public funds, I haven't got a job anymore, and I am now at my wit's end because I've spent a lot of money for what I thought was a valid visa, what I thought was a valid permit to come and work in the UK, and that is no longer the case. So that is when, I can't go into specific individual cases because each case is different, but what my job has been is to make sure that we get all of the information from them and then to make representations to the Home Office to say, look, this is what's going on, and it's not fair on this individual who's got the requisite qualifications, and there are many individuals who are, for example, in the healthcare sector. Yeah, they've come in, they have got, whether it's for a nurse, whether it's for a social care worker, and when they know that there are huge vacancies. So what I've been trying to point out to the government as well, you are saying that we've got more than 124,000 vacancies in the social care sector. You've got somebody here who has come on a valid visa and has the requisite qualifications for that role. How about we show some good working and whereby that individual skill sets can then be utilized in that role within our country. So those are some of the things that I have been trying to do. Believe me, I'm not one of those that have been looking to stoke up divisions as some within the government have been doing, and they're constantly just talking about small boats and how they want to stop immigration, how they want to do this, do that. It is better when we treat individuals with a great level of respect and dignity, because they have done their level best, spent a lot of money, got their qualifications, and they are here on a valid visa. So that's where, like I said, without going into individual cases, is if you are affected by any such things, please do contact me. And Kevin, on a more policy-wide national basis, please do email any suggestions that you may have, anything that you think can make the system better on a policy framework, because, touch wood, if a Labour government does come in, and it will be up to the electorate again. I hope the good people of Slough will continue to support their MP, but wherever you live, you have a choice ultimately as to whether you carry on with a Conservative government or whether you elect a Labour government and so on. But for us, within the Labour Party, we are very open to ideas and suggestions as to how we can make the system work better for all of us, so that we don't treat it in the negative manner. We also treat the fact that those who are here on a valid work visa, they make an enormous contribution. Immigrants, like some of my parents and others, many of yourselves who may not have been born in the UK, immigrants make an enormous positive contribution to our economy, to our schools, to our hospitals, to our public services. And it is up to us also to appreciate those efforts as well. So thank you very much.
Anyone else? Another question for the MP? All right.
Brilliant. Don't worry, if you're shy, as I said, come and catch up with me personally and within one of our advice surgeries. Thank you very much.
Let's give a round of applause for our MP. So we want to appreciate Mr. Desi for always honoring our invites. Thank you so much, even as you go. Hopefully we'll get to see it. Thank you so much. We appreciate you. So we'll have another session for Q&A after this. So please take note if you have any question to do with kids or children education and what the next session that we're getting into. Please take note. Please take note. So we're here to, there's a lot of, it's a wealth of knowledge that's been given freely, and people get to pay to get this kind of knowledge. So please we don't take it for granted. Hello, somebody. So right about now, we're about to welcome the next guest. We are so honored to have our next guest. Our esteemed guest is the Director of Legal Services and Innovation at Beacon Avenue Group. So he's here to bring a wealth of experience in legal matters to enlighten and guide us. Are you ready? Are you ready? Please help me welcome Kevin Karue. Welcome, Kevin.
Hello, everyone. How are you today? You've had quite wonderful speakers, so I'll do my best to keep the theme going. My name is Kevin Karue. I'm honored that I do know some people in the crowd today, although we're meeting for the first time. My business, Beacon Avenue Group, what we do is essentially we help people move from point A to point B, which is what immigration is. So my mandate today is to speak to you about life in the UK from a skilled worker or health and care visa point of view. And what I'll be looking to do is I'll do a bit of background, run through, because I think there's some people here who are skilled workers or health and care, run through a few things like what does it look like when you're renewing, compliance issues, all the way through to getting to settlement, potentially citizenship, and and there's new regulations as well that have come in play. So I'll try and cover that in probably about 30 minutes or so. If you have any questions, please do feel free to ask when I finished, essentially. Next slide, please. My background. So I studied, I was educated in Kenya, but I did my university here, both my law degree, master's, trained as a barrister and a solicitor, although I don't necessarily practice as one, but like I said, what the business does is we advise sponsors. So most of the time I've interacted with some people here or in other businesses because I help the sponsors from this first step, and I do try and give them the advice about how to remain compliant, because if your sponsor or employer is compliant, then chances are your status is secure. We do a few things, which we focus on 3 areas. So legal services, recruitment, and technology. And the way we frame that is those are the three key areas that any small or medium-sized business needs to succeed in today's world. So we try and package that into all three of them into one so that we're able to help you succeed as a business owner, whether that's a sole trader or two-person director business. We have the skills and ability to do that. Next slide, please. Right, so let's get into it. So the health and care visa is a subset of the wider skilled worker route. The skilled worker route generally covers any job which is skilled, and there's a long list of jobs listed on the gov.uk website. Now, during the COVID-19 pandemic, obviously, there was severe shortages, and we saw the government do things like, for example, allowing students to switch without completing their course. And from that came the health and care visa, which is specifically designed for workers who are coming to work in social care, whether that be for the NHS or a private employer. Now, we know that since this health and care visa started, there's been roughly around 100,000 people who've come over to do these jobs. Even more surprising is there's been roughly 250,000 dependents who've also moved with those skilled workers or health and care workers. So suffice to say, it is contributing quite a lot to the UK economy and the shortage of skills that is there. Most of you will have received, and I believe would have applied from outside Kenya, so you would have received your certificate of sponsorship. Now, it works the same way. The key thing to understand is a health and care visa is a subset of the wider skilled worker visa. So if you are hired as an accountant, a manager, you would normally fall under a normal skilled worker visa. But the health and care is the same, just that there was some special requirements which were created. For example, you pay about £250 for your visa, whereas if it was a normal skilled worker visa, you'd have been paying double that, about £780. You would also have been paying something we call the immigration health surcharge, which has just been increased to £10.35 per year. So if you do the math, if today you're given a 3-year visa, just for the health surcharge, you'd be paying just about £3,000 plus your visa fee. So if you compare £250, well, it's £284 versus almost £3,500, it is a good route to be in. That being said, we know that there's been some issues, and I'll get into that in a moment. So most visas, the skilled worker and others, are what we call points-based visas, okay? And it's important to understand why points-based, why it's called points-based. Your certificate gives you 40 points, which means at the point at which your employer is allocating you a COS, certificate of sponsorship, it must be an appropriate job and at the right skill level, and that gives you 40 points. The salary that is offered must be appropriate for the job that you're being sponsored to do. And lastly, which gives you 20 points, and lastly, English language. You must have 70 points. It's either you have it or you don't have it. People generally move for 3 reasons when you move from one country to the other. For work, i.e. pursuing better opportunities, to study, which closely related to work, family reasons, which is like reunion. For example, you have your spouse visas and the like. And lastly, you've got the category where people don't have a choice, which is where people flee in countries, try and get to the UK because they need to claim asylum and so on. The other 2 routes when you need to claim asylum and you're moving for family reunion fall under what we call human rights, which means even if you don't quite meet the requirements of a particular route, you may still have a chance of getting a visa or being granted whilst you're in the UK. With points-based visas, it doesn't work like that. You are required to meet the points or you don't. There is no human rights argument you can bring. It doesn't matter, at least to them, to the government, and the way the rules have been created, that you may be facing extreme circumstances. For example, with the question I raised for your honourable MP, if your sponsor was to lose their license and you find yourself, you've been given 60 days to leave, what do you do? Even if you've got the youngest child or this or the other, the route is not designed to have any compassionate circumstances. So it is part of my job today is I'm going to try and explain how this whole thing works and hopefully give you some more insight into what you can do should you find yourself in that situation. Now, the most important person in this route is always the main applicant, so the person who's been sponsored. Up until the 10th of March this year, anybody who's been given a COS under health and care can bring dependents. I'll cover the changes a little bit later. Now, the main applicant is the most important because when we talk about getting to the stage of, for example, getting indefinite leave, if the main applicant doesn't get it, the dependents don't get it. So for most people, you're essentially, from the first day, you're on what we call a 5-year path to get to the stage where you can apply for settlement, i.e. indefinite leave to remain. After that, you can go for citizenship. So in those 5 years, there are things that you need to do, and there are things you're entitled to do. For example, if we could just go to oh yeah, there we are. So you're allowed to study. As my friend Teddy said, if you're here for 3 years, you may be eligible for studying. So I'll just explain a little bit how that relates with, for example, if you're here as a health and care visa worker. Because the visa you have is not one that is settled, although you've been here for 3 years, you would not yet qualify for student finance. But you're not too far off, because by the time you get to 3 years, you just have another 2 years, and as long as one of your parents is able to then qualify, then that begins to change the process for an entire family. Other rights that you have is you can take on a secondary job. Now, this is probably something that has affected a lot of carers, and the like, because some employers have not had enough work, and so you've probably sought to get another job. So generally, you can take on another job based on 2 conditions. One is it can be the same job or any other job on the shortage list. If you just Google immigration shortage list, shortage occupation list, that will come up. There's a long list of jobs there which are counted as on the shortage list. So it's either you're doing the same job as your main sponsor or you're doing a job on the shortage list. If you do a job that's not on the shortage list, technically you're not being compliant because you're not allowed to do that. You can also only do a second job for 20 hours per week, and it has to be outside the hours that you would normally be working for your main employer. In theory, you'd kind of need to sometimes work with your main employer to figure out, how does this work? But if you're lucky enough to be able to get another job and you're able to make it work alongside the main one, that's great. Another less common thing that people don't know you can do is you can actually have 2 sponsors. So you can actually have job A that, say, sponsors you for 30 hours, and you can have another sponsor who sponsors you same way. What tends to happen is if you're approved, your biometric card will have 2 sponsor license numbers on it. So it is possible. It tends to work more for medical professionals. For example, somebody who's trained as a doctor overseas. And because when they come to the UK, there's certain processes they need to follow. You'll find one trust will sponsor them for a certain period of time, and then another trust will also sponsor them. It is also possible for anybody under the health and care visa route to have 2 sponsors. It's uncommon though, but should you feel that that's a route that works, that is doable. At the end of, I think most people get 3 years in the beginning, and your employer will then look to give you an additional certificate to then get you to the next stage, which is up to 5 years. Now, for a normal skilled worker route, the maximum time you can have is 6 years. I believe, and I do have to check this because the rules are always changing, I think under health and care visa, you can continue to renew it for more than that. However, you wouldn't need to do that because as soon as you get to the 5-year mark, you're eligible for indefinite leave to remain. But sometimes people can find themselves in a situation where you need to keep renewing. Could be because of excessive absences, which is an important requirement of your stay here. So it depends on the reason. sometimes there's reasons why people have to keep renewing rather than going for settlement. Absences is an important thing to think about. It's not needed to extend your stay. So you came, you got your 3 years, you're coming to the end of that 3 years, your employer gives you a new COS. They will not look at absences at that point. But at the indefinite leave to remain stage, absences are important. You're not meant to have more than 180 days outside the country per year. And the way it's calculated is it's done at any point in time. What does that mean? When you apply, the date of your application or the date you submit your online form becomes the date you've applied. So let's assume that is today, which is the 3rd of March. Today becomes my application date. If I was applying for indefinite leave to remain today, and I've had absences, they look at it from, you must not have had more than 80 days per year, and it's not a calendar year. It's not January to December. It's in any combination, whether it's January to December, February to March, June to July. So it's very complicated. Now, I wouldn't expect a main applicant to have those kind of absences, but I might expect a dependent who's not working the sector to have those kind of absences. So if you're a dependent, and it does happen to a lot of people who, for some reason or the other, maybe they're not interested in being here, and I can fully understand that. I also like to spend more time in Kenya. You will get caught out. You will not be able to get indefinite leave to remain until your absences are fixed. So if you're a dependent, you need to be mindful of how much time you're spending outside the UK, because it will cut you out at the indefinite leave to remain stage. Let's go to the next slide. Now, compliance is something which tends to be more critical for the sponsor or the employer than it is for the employee, but there's a few things we can cover which are important. One is what I mentioned before about you can only work in approved jobs, essentially in terms of your second job. So if you were ever caught out working in a job that is not on the shortage list or not the job you're sponsored for, technically you are in breach of the conditions of your leave. It is open to the Home Office to take action against you, and because it's a points-based route, as I said before, they have very little sympathy that is built into the rules. The route, any points-based route, whether it's Minister of Religion, skilled worker, innovator visa, they're not designed to have sympathy. They're designed, these are the requirements, comply or don't. So if you get caught out, it could go bad very quickly. Now, criminal convictions and issues at work, for example, safeguarding issues, is something to be very mindful about, because this can affect you at the settlement stage. Now, convictions here includes a speeding ticket, which, although technically it's not quite a criminal offense, it does fall under the remit of criminal law. So if you do drive, you do need to be mindful of things like that. I've had cases with some clients where some of the workers who've come over are a bit careless with the things they're doing, maybe whether it's in domiciliary care and so on, and then there ends up being a safeguarding issue. In the most extreme of circumstances, a safeguarding issue could lead to a DBS marker on your DBS. And if that was to happen, not only can you not work for your employer, you can't work in the industry. So if you can't work in the industry, technically your employer will end your sponsorship, and you'd be looking for a new sponsor, only that now you can't even move to another business in health and care. So I would encourage anybody who's in this, who does this work, to be very careful about safeguarding issues, because a DBS marker is something that can essentially end your career, and you'd be unemployable. It's a bit different to, for example, if you are, I don't know, say you had a disciplinary at work, maybe you disagree with your employer, you resign or something, you can still move to somebody else, because that's more of an issue between you and perhaps one employer. But a DBS marker will affect your ability to work with any vulnerable people, adults, children, so it becomes virtually impossible to get another job. Now, there's a long list of things that, as an employee, you shouldn't be doing, but like I said, most of the compliance side of things tend to fall on the employer side. As long as you are doing the job you've been brought here to do, you're not breaching the rules on a secondary job, you should find the renewal stage fairly easy. Renewal works the same way as it does the first time you're sponsored, whether you came from outside or whether you switched from inside the country. All you need is a COS. Again, that gives you pretty much 40 points, salary is 20. Because you've been assessed for English language the first time, you don't normally need, in fact, you don't need to do another English test. So they will essentially, you can't forget English if you already proved you know it. So they won't assess you again. So renewal tends to be very, very straightforward. Your only job there is to ensure your performance is okay, and so that your employer can give you a new certificate. One less commonly known thing is that your employer is not obliged to sponsor you beyond the initial period of your sponsorship. So that means if you were given a COS for 3 years, your contract is for 3 years. At the end of that 3 years, they're well within their rights to say, well, thank you very much, we will not be extending your stay. Now, that can be a very odd thing to find yourself in. So if you find yourself getting closer to the time for renewal, you want to know that your employer is going to renew and give you a new certificate, which they have to request from the Home Office, so that you're able to make an in-country application to extend your stay here. If you don't get a new certificate, then obviously your time is going to lapse, and becoming an overstay is not a good place to be, because unlike perhaps more than 10 years ago, the Home Office works with the banks. You won't be able to rent. Eventually your bank account can be closed. DVLA can take away your license. So they make it's essentially what the Conservative government call the hostile environment. If you don't have leave to remain, they create circumstances that make it impossible to live. So it's important you be thinking, am I going to get a new certificate or not? Because you do need to know. One issue that may affect some people is what happens if, for example, if you're a lady, you become pregnant and you need to take maternity leave, or if you are on extended sick leave. The way the sponsorship system works, it goes side by side with employment law, okay? Now, employment law takes precedence because these are laws passed by Parliament, so you'll tend to find it's an act of law, a statute or something. So things protecting things like minimum wage and so on, those are set in law. The licensing system and immigration rules work a bit differently. Most of the rules are contained in PDF documents that the Home Office or the Home Secretary is free to decide what they want to do. It works under a principle we call negative resolution. So if the Home Secretary wants to change, I don't know, for example, we want to stop dependence of healthcare workers coming to the UK. They don't have to go and discuss that in Parliament. The Home Secretary will get her team within the Home Office, come up with how can we implement this. Once it's ready, all they have to do is inform Parliament, this is what we're doing, and those laws effectively, the rules, in fact we call them rules, not laws, will pass. So things like, the reason I'm explaining this is because the sponsorship system is a little bit less, it's very strict, but it can lead to very harsh circumstances. A good example is something like maternity leave. Employers are not obliged to have company maternity pay or company sick pay. But if you've worked for them long enough, you may be eligible for what we call statutory sick pay or statutory maternity pay. Looking at the average wage of your average care worker, if you have to take maternity leave and you're not eligible for statutory maternity pay, which works out at about 90% of your wage for the first 6 weeks, and then after that it goes down to something like, I think, £190 a week. Generally, that's not enough to sustain a family, depending on who else is comprising that family and what other job they're doing. So it's one of those, it's unfortunate because you can't force companies to pay maternity pay, to have a private scheme, including sick pay. But it's something that I've seen a few people I've interacted with who found themselves in that situation, and it can be a bit tricky. Some have had to go back home for some time because it's quite costly to raise a child in this country. So that's just something I wanted to mention, which may or may not, some people may find themselves facing. Let's go to the next slide. Right, so settlement and citizenship. The name of the game is always get to 5 years, you get your indefinite leave to remain. You're eligible once you've completed 5 years in this route. Key thing to know, some people may be coming from other points-based routes, So you are able to combine time. For example, somebody who was a minister of religion can combine their time on that route with time on the skilled worker route to get to the 5 years. But I assume most people would be on the route where you just spend 5 years with one employer, multiple employers. Key to remember, as long as you stay within the route, it doesn't matter how many employers you've had. So you can move employers every year if you want to. But as long as you're getting successive grants of leave to remain under the skilled worker route, even if it's not specifically health and care, your time is protected. So sometimes you find people who maybe came as a family, one person the main applicant, 2 years in, they swap, the dependent becomes the main applicant. If you do that, you lose the time you've accumulated. So your time starts from scratch. So it's normally a good idea to think, do you really need to swap? Because if you do, then just remember you're losing the time you've accumulated, including the time as a dependent. Both of you start from scratch. But assuming it's the normal situation, so you get to the 5-year mark. At that stage, there's a few things you need to be aware of. One, your sponsor must still hold a worker license. So if I'm eligible today, and today my sponsor loses their license, I can't apply for indefinite leave to remain with that sponsor. So their license must still be valid at the date you make your application. Your sponsor has to give you a letter that says you are still required for the role or for the work that you do for them for the foreseeable future. That's usually fairly straightforward. It's just a simple letter. Then there is a salary requirement. For most other jobs in the skilled worker route, it's normally quite high, which actually I think as of the 11th of March, you'd need to be earning at least £38,000 or the going rate for your job. So that means if the going rate for your job is 40,000, then you need to be earning at least 40,000. For the health and care, the exemption on the lower salary still continues to apply. So at the moment, it's 20,960, and at least the going rate for the job. So I think we're expecting these rates are going up to about 23,200. So anybody applying for indefinite leave to remain, you need to make sure in the run-up to when you're eligible, your employer increases your salary. Quick tip is you have to have this conversation with your employer. The Home Office is not a fan of people's salaries being increased really close to when they apply because they look at it that the employer is just doing it to help you. In normal jobs, you tend to have appraisals, which happen at structured times. So what I'm basically saying is you need to be actively aware of your circumstances. How far are you for indefinite leave to remain? If you know you're about a year out, then you know, okay, I need to be thinking about what my salary is going to be if it's not at the right level. I think for most people under health and care, you'll be fine because the gap between 20,160 and I think 23,200 is not that great. But if, for example, you had to go from being paid, say, 21 grand a year, you know, that assuming overtime, and you had to show you're earning, say, 38,000, that's a very big jump that an employer would find very, very difficult to justify. Luckily, that's, at least for now, that's not going to happen to health and care workers. So those are the main requirements to be able to apply for indefinite leave to remain. If you find yourself that when you entered this route, the job you were doing was on the shortage list, but it's no longer the shortage list, again, not to worry. When the rules change, they tend not to be retrospective, which means as long as you've continued to do the same job, you will be considered as per the rules, as per how the rules were when you first entered the route, so when you were first sponsored. So there is some protection there. And I think generally, by and large, that's it. Now, we talked about, assuming you get to indefinite leave to remain, the main applicant has to get it first, and then dependents. You can apply at the same time, but no dependent succeeds unless the main applicant succeeds. So again, like I said before, it's very important for the main applicant to be able to make sure they meet the requirements, because they succeed, dependents succeed. When it comes to citizenship, you have to wait 1 year after you get to indefinite leave to remain, unless you subsequently marry a British citizen. If you do marry a British citizen and you get indefinite, you are allowed to apply immediately. So instead of waiting 1 year, you can apply straight away. But if those are not your circumstances, you have to wait at least 1 year of having indefinite leave to remain, which is being free of immigration restrictions.
when you get your, another thing I should mention, when you get your indefinite leave to remain, you have to spend at least 1 day in the UK every 2 years. So if you decide, I'm going to leave the country, go back home, wherever that is, and just stay there, if you spend more than 2 years consecutively outside the UK, your indefinite leave to remain lapses. And then you have to apply as a returning resident, which can be a complicated process. So until you get your citizenship, you need to watch out for your absences. I talked about absences before and how they can affect you when it's time to apply for indefinite leave to remain. It's not just indefinite leave to remain you're worried about, it's also citizenship, because the rules and absence on citizenship are also fairly strict. They look at the last 5 years. If at the point you apply you're not British, you're not married to a British citizen. So, for example, if you're applying for citizenship today, they would expect to have no more than 450 days outside the country in the last 5 years, no more than 90 days outside the country in the immediate 12 months, and on the date that you apply, you must have been physically present in the UK 5 years ago. If it's 3 years, it becomes 270 days in the last 3 years, 90 days in 12 months, and again, the requirement to be physically present on the same date, either 5 or 3 years ago. So today's what, 2024? So if I applied today on the 3rd of March, on the 3rd of March in 2019, I would need to have been physically present in the country. So as in your lead up, again, this probably affects dependents more than a main applicant, because I can't see how you can justify you're working as a skilled worker or health and care worker and you've got excessive absences. I don't see it. But dependents, I have seen some who do spend a lot of time. It may affect you for indefinite leave to remain, and it can also affect you for citizenship. End of the day, what they're looking for is you're applying to be in this country. They want to know that your loyalty lies here, particularly when you're applying for citizenship, that you've integrated and that you spent enough time here so that they know and they understand that you know what it's like to be British. One of the other requirements that you'll need to have done at the indefinite leave to remain stage is doing something we call a Life in the UK test. It's a test of, I think, do I remember how many questions? 25, I think, and you have to pass with 75%. It used to be questions which had a lot of old British history from 1066 and other things. I understand they have modernized it a bit now, so they'll ask more modern questions, but you do have to pass that test in addition to the other requirements I mentioned. You need that certificate for both indefinite leave to remain and citizenship. The advantage is you only do it once, it doesn't expire. So if you do it just before you get indefinite, you're fine. You don't need to do it again for citizenship. English language requirement applies to both indefinite leave and settlement. You have to pass at level B1. Again, if you're a skilled worker, you would already meet this requirement. But because most English test certificates tend to last for 2 years, and depending on what the rules are on the date you apply, as of today, if you already met this requirement, you'd be deemed to have met it, even if your certificate has technically expired. Most people prefer to just do a new one, just to be on the safe side, because some people may not be represented, so they would choose to go for the safer route. Nothing wrong with that. But it covers you for both processes, both indefinite leave and citizenship. Citizenship is a matter of law. What that means is you apply based on set grounds. For most people would be naturalization, which is you spend your 5 years in the UK, and that's the base upon which you got indefinite, so you're naturalizing as a British citizen. If you have children born in the UK whilst you're a skilled worker, on the date, if you have children born after you have indefinite leave to remain, those children are automatically British. So if I get indefinite leave to remain today, next year, say I have another child, then automatically they're British, even if you don't yet have British citizenship. If you've had children born before you're British, when you get your indefinite, you are eligible to apply for them to be registered as British citizens. So there's quite a lot of benefits to that, but just things to think about. I think since this started, some people would probably be at the 3.5-year mark since 2020, so you're not too far off. Criminality is most important for citizenship. A speeding ticket will prevent you from getting citizenship. It won't prevent it from indefinite leave to remain, but with citizenship, they can take it seriously, including things like debts, CCJs and stuff like that. Probably the one to be more worried about is things like speeding tickets, because if you get a series of them, you're going to have to wait 5 years before you can reapply. So the threshold can be really low. So it's a lot harder to plan your way. You know, I want to become a British citizen. Yet, for example, if you drive, it's very likely at some point or the other, you know, you could get a speeding ticket or traffic light contravention, something like that. It can. So you have to keep that in mind. If, assuming you get your citizenship, because it's a matter of law, you get your naturalization certificate. After that, you can then apply for a British passport. Top tip that people don't know, they don't have to give you a British passport even if you have citizenship, because your passports don't belong to you, they belong to the king. So they can actually refuse to give you one, even though you're a British citizen. But if you get your citizenship, there's no reason why you should be able to get a passport, which is the simpler part of the process. Be mindful of name changes when you get to the stage of applying for a British passport, because you can't have a passport in one name and you're looking to apply for a British passport another name. If you change your name by deed poll, for example, not so complicated, because then you'll have to go change your Kenyan one. But if, for example, like when ladies get married and you take your husband's name, although they can do it, they tend not to prefer it. They'll normally want you go change your Kenyan passport first, and then you can come change your British passport. I think that's as much as we can cover with that. I think that's the goal that a lot of people are trying to work towards. I think the benefits of becoming British in this country are fairly obvious. Yeah, any questions, I'll cover that later. So next slide, please. I think we're getting to the end. So there are new regulations for anybody working under health and care. So these were published, I think in October last year is when they started the work, seeing that they need to change things, largely because of all the complaints and abuse that's happened. In December, they published what is going to change, and the key changes are dependents are no longer allowed if you're under the health and care visa. So if you work as a carer, senior carer, care coordinator, there are a long list of jobs which fall under health and care. From the 11th of March, you are no longer allowed to bring dependents. No spouse, no children. If you have already been sponsored and you're already here and you haven't brought your dependents, you will be able to continue doing so. So you can still sponsor your dependents even after the 11th of March. New sponsors will be required to hold a CQC license to be able to get the license and also subsequently sponsor care workers or health and care workers. Now that could be an interesting one, because there are some businesses who are currently not CQC registered who have had license and have sponsored people. What the government has said is you will be able to extend the time for your workers, but they cannot issue a new certificate to somebody new. So if you're already sponsored by a business that's not CQC regulated, after the 11th of March, say it comes to time for renewal, they'll be able to do that to extend your stay. What they will not be able to do is to sponsor somebody new. That also means if you are employed by a non-CQC business and you decide to change employers, you have to move to an employer that is CQC regulated. You cannot move to an employer who's not CQC regulated after the 11th of March. So if you find yourself in the situation, you need to consider that. So switching will become a bit more complicated for anybody who's looking to move from one business to another if one happens not to be CQC regulated. There's some other minor changes that will be implemented which really don't affect health and care, but in terms of health and care, those are the three main things. So dependents are not allowed. Any new sponsors must have a CQC license to apply for a sponsor license, and workers who are in a non-CQC business can still have their time extended, but you can't switch from a non-CQC to another non-CQC, or from a CQC one to another that's not, so you have to keep that in mind. That's by and large the main changes. We are expecting some minor changes to the salary levels. At the moment, the minimum, I think, is just about 21,000 for 37.5 hours. I think that may go up to about 23,200. So your employer will be responsible for dealing with that. The next slide, which is probably the last bit that I will cover, is the question I was asking your MP, which is, what do you do if your employer has their license revoked? Now, unfortunately, the licensing system and immigration rules generally are complex, even though they don't seem to be. But the licensing system is more complex because when you're an employee or you're sponsored, you don't see the burden that workers have. The work that I do is I always tell potential clients, I'm not here to fill in a form for you to help you apply for the license. That's the easy part of the process. That's just fill in a form, you can do it in 20 minutes. The real work is, do you know the duties you're applying for so that you can stay compliant for the duration of your license and beyond? And that's really where is the bit where it's very tricky for most employers to remain compliant. What I will say is not every sponsor has done the worst thing that you could think. Unfortunately, it's very easy for their licenses to be revoked. Minor things as, for example, somebody had 2 months somewhere they were not working and the records are not kept as well, even though, maybe later on the work was there. When they do a compliance visit, that can lead to that employer losing their license. So, and as an employee, you don't really get to know when the compliance visit is happening. And most employers are not prepared or well equipped to be able to deal with these compliance visits. Even when sometimes, personally, I do think some of the reasons are quite minor and therefore shouldn't lead to the worst outcome. But if it does happen, you should know. There's no way of knowing that this is going to happen. The way it works is the Home Office will write to an employer and they'll say, we're due to come for a compliance visit on such and such a date. That can be online, that can be physical, face-to-face. They will ask them to provide various documents. They'll be looking at the systems. They'll review employee files. They normally also want to speak to employees. They normally select who they want to speak to from a list. So you also may find yourself being told they need to come speak to you. It's normally random. So it's not anything. It's random. And in the most serious of cases, what will happen is they will just email the sponsor and suspend the license immediately. This can happen, for example, if they have some intelligence or something that tells them this employer is not compliant, so we're going to suspend your license, and as we investigate what's going on. Now, if a license is suspended and you're in the process of sponsoring your dependents, those applications will not be decided, but technically you should be fine. I would normally advise just sponsor your dependents as and when you can, just so you get over that hurdle. Now, if the compliance visit, whether it's with or without suspension, results in revocation of the license, first of all, the revocation takes effect immediately. So on the date they email your employer or your sponsor and say, we've revoked your license, it's with immediate effect. And what happens next is within a few days, could take about a week or slightly more, they will write to each and every individual sponsored worker by a particular business, and they will inform you that the license has been revoked, that they will write to you again, and when they do, that second letter will be to curtail your leave, which simply means to cut your leave short, but they will write to you again. The only time they don't do that is if for any reason, as part of the investigation, they think a particular employee is involved in the reasons why the sponsor is having their license revoked. That's the only time you would not get 60 days, you'd get essentially immediately curtailed. Now, how long the second letter takes to arrive, nobody knows. Some businesses, some workers under a particular business will get it after 2 months, which means you've ended up having 2 months and 60 days. Some people, it can take a year, so the whole year you still have right to work. Can be a bit difficult to prove right to work to other employers whilst you're waiting for this letter, because one of the key requirements of taking a second job is being able to work. You must still be working for your main employer. Now, when you find yourself in the middle, your sponsor has lost their license, technically you're no longer working for the main employer. Or even if you are, you're not a sponsored worker anymore. So it's a bit of a gray area that you'll find some employers will be hesitant to give you a job because they don't know how to interact with, well, are you sponsored, are you not? Technically you're not, but you still have a right to work. Your visa's not yet been curtailed or cut short. So sometimes it's just down to just luck, try your luck with other employers who are less worried about it, because you do have a right to work. So when you get the second letter, that now gives you 60 days. I'll be honest, it's fairly difficult to challenge sponsor license revocation. So more often than not, most sponsors choose not to challenge. And even if they do, it doesn't guarantee that they will succeed. challenges in this area come down to showing a case working error, so they can be very difficult. So the most likely solution for most people is look for a new employer, because I think to date I only know about 3 companies who've challenged the decision and only 1 has succeeded. Obviously I don't have that, I don't know all who may have lost, but even the one that succeeded, the problem with that is the judge does not tell them what the decision should have been. Instead, it becomes go back and make the decision again, which means they can go back and come back and revoke it again because they could, for example, find new evidence of non-compliance. So the solution tends to be, just look for a new employer, which, as we've heard, can be difficult now. If, for example, you're in a non-CQC business, you have to look for a CQC business. You can apply for any other category that you're eligible for. Now, it's very difficult to know what those categories are because I don't know what somebody would want to do. So, for example, you may decide I'm going to study. You might decide, some people who do health and care, for example, have other careers. You could switch into something we call global talent. You might decide you want to start a business, you want to switch into that. But you can apply for any other category. Most people tend to just apply for asylum and move on to, and hope that they can make a case that allows them to stay. It's not a good place to be in, it's unfortunate, and the only thing I can say is, should you find yourself in that situation, it's good to get advice so that you understand what does it mean for you. Because if you lose it's not just your leave being curtailed, it's also your dependents. Your dependents will also have their leave cut short. So I do hope, I don't know what we can come up with, but I do hope the government can change something because for most sponsors, they've not really done the worst thing, but even something minor sees them lose their license, and as of now, at least the Home Office doesn't seem to be thinking about the impact that it has on the hundreds of thousands of workers who've diligently come to help this country with their shortages. So by and large, I think that is an overview of how the skilled worker system works, particularly the health and care, and look forward to any questions.
Let's appreciate Kevin. By the way, this is one of the best lawyers we have in the land, so we're really privileged. Anyone who has a question, maybe after this, Kevin will let us know if he's easily reachable. If you want to reach him for further questions, he'll leave maybe his email or his contact. Any question?
Thank you, Kevin, for that elaborate presentation. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I have 2 questions. So one, what are the do's and don'ts under skilled worker in the context of tax?
Okay.
Do's and don'ts. Second question, towards application for settlement, how far does Home Office go, depending on the case officer handling your situation? How far do they go to check your tax situation if you're in the health and care route and you're applying for settlement? So as far as tax, because that's a big thing, but people are not really sure,
Okay.
including myself sometimes, yeah.
Right, I think I'll deal with the second question. That's easier to deal with. Generally, at the stage of applying for settlement, you only need to provide, in fact, you don't even have to provide 3 months pay slips. It's just as of the date you're applying, the immediate 1 month. You just need to provide a letter from the employer that says they still need you. You prove you're being paid the correct salary, which is normally in the letter. You can add 1 pay slip. You don't need to provide a bank statement. And the other requirements are basically down to having the Life in the UK test and English language. So they don't tend to go beyond the immediate month, which means some people do get lucky. Maybe you've had a bit of a difficult time with some employers, but say in the last 6 months with a new employer, you are meeting the requirements. So they don't tend to go that far back. The only time they can go further back is if they choose to look into your employer. So you've applied for settlement, but they choose, actually, we want to look into your employer. So it used to happen quite a lot, particularly before Brexit. They would use that opportunity to do a compliance visit. There's just no way of knowing. But it's normally fairly straightforward. The beauty of the points and base system is it's supposed to be straightforward. Although it can have harsh consequences, when you're meeting the requirements, you have to get it. There's no two ways. But because of the link to your sponsor, that's the only measure of uncertainty that's introduced into that, because you don't know what they're looking into. You don't know whether your sponsor has passed a compliance check and therefore things are good. Most licenses are issued for 4 years, so you could be applying at a time where they think, oh, actually, we've not audited this business. Because when you get the license, most businesses got it without a compliance visit, so they've never visited your business. So as an employee, you don't know that, but should be fairly straightforward. You don't need to provide more than 1 month's payslip and a letter from the employer. I always say keep it simple. They did used to ask for P60s. Again, you can get through without providing P60s for every year. So people who, for example, have found it hard to get all the hours from their employer, maybe have been working somewhere else, your P60s are not going to show the salary level they would be expecting to see. At indefinite leave to remain stage, if you can, please seek legal advice. It's usually the best, so that you don't go and provide more documents that you need to. Hope that answers the second question. Now, in relation to the first one, I'm not sure the angle you're coming from, but what comes to mind is sometimes some people want to, for example, incorporate a business, which they are paid through. And I don't know if that's the angle you're coming from, but when it comes to taxes, if you're an employee, your employer handles that. It's handled automatically. So you shouldn't have any taxation issues. What can be a problem is and you're not supposed to be, if you're being paid as a self-employed person, now that can have some problems. Although it is technically possible, it's a very complicated way to do it, and your certificate of sponsorship would normally need to indicate that you're being paid as a self-employed person. Because if you are, then you are responsible for getting your own accountant and doing your own taxes every year. But as an employee, it's, PAYE is very straightforward. Once you're an employee, when they run payroll, the system works out automatically what's been deducted and so on. So I wouldn't really expect anybody who's an employee to have any issues with HMRC or taxation. Again, taxation is not something the Home Office looks at. In probably more than 5 years ago, there was a different route where this was a problem. Those people were self-employed, hence why they had issues. But if you're an employee, I would not expect you to have any issues whatsoever, including even if your employer has been doing things that they're not supposed to do. It should not affect you as an employee, because there's nothing you can do about it. You work, you pay, you get a pay slip. If they've not been, for example, paying their NI contributions or something, it's not going to affect you. Don't know if that answers the first one. Yeah? Okay. Any other questions?
Thank you so much. Oh, thank you so much, Kevin.
Sorry, say that again?
Possible to have a one-to-one with you after this session?
Yes. Let's see what time it is. Yeah, should be okay. Should be okay. Hopefully we're not going to take too long, because I do have somewhere else to be, but yeah.
Thank you for the informative session. My question is, if you've got COS visa and you're employed obviously by the company,
sorry, say that again?
If you've got a COS visa and
Yep.
you're employed directly by the company, your sponsor, and you need, say you require more hours and you happen to have shifts via a different company that is not a sponsor, how does that impact your documentation in a sense? Because you're having, not enough hours, but obviously your salary and tax from one company that is the sponsor, but additional income from a separate one that is not necessarily your sponsor. Does that?
So are you asking how does from a taxation point of view, how does the second job affect?
Yes, just
right.
Piggybacking on the question that was raised.
I'm not an accountant, but I do have some knowledge on this. So in the UK, the way it works is if the second employer puts you down as an employee, you do end up paying more tax because HMRC doesn't know how much tax you've been paying because of the second job, because they would put you down as it's not your first job since the 6th of April. What tends to happen is you'll find you're paying more tax in the months after that. However, chances are, because what they do is it's almost like an emergency tax. So what tends to happen is you'll notice you're paying more, but at the end of the tax year, which the personal tax year obviously runs from 6th of April to 5th of April, if they work out you've paid too much, they'll normally send you a refund check around June, July. So they don't tend to get it wrong. It's just because they don't know how much tax you are, how much you've paid to date. Although they have the figures. Sometimes it can correct itself. You'll find maybe the first month it's a bit high, or second month, and then in your next pay slips you realize instead of having a deduction, you have a positive. So it really depends. The challenge with this is it's something that happens automatically. So whichever accountant and software system they're using, it will just work itself out. From being compliant in terms of being in the route, the tax side has nothing to do with the Home Office and your conditions of leave. The only thing you have to be mindful of is you're only allowed to do 20 hours additional per week in a second job. So if you are doing more than 20 hours in a second job, then technically you're not compliant. And if ever they were to look into it, obviously being paid a lot more could be evidence of you not being compliant. But like I said, if you're applying for indefinite leave to remain, they will only ask you for 1 month's pay slip. So in theory, you need to make sure that that pay slip is correct, right? I know there are situations where people are doing, well, more hours with the second job than they are with the first job because potentially maybe their main employer doesn't have the hours. The answer to that is you're still not allowed to do more than 20 hours. So it's one of those, it's a gray area because the rule on this is you must be working for your main sponsor and you can only do more than 20 hours. The practical way to answer this is it probably isn't a problem even for renewal, but if you find yourself in this situation coming up to indefinite leave to remain, you want to sort it out somehow. I'm not sure if that really answers everything, but the key thing to understand is Home Office does have access to HMRC records. They can request access, but because most people in this route are an employee taxes work automatically. They're not really looking at that. Any abuse that happens with the taxation isn't done by the employee. It tends to be maybe they have an issue with the employer or something. So I wouldn't really ever expect, and I've never seen anybody who's an employee under this route, health and care, skilled worker, even from before, have any taxation issues come up because you don't have anything to do with it. There's nothing you can do to control it.
Okay. So but what if it's so extreme that you have no hours with the sponsor and then you have hours outside? With your second job? For a period of time?
Yeah, I'm aware it's something that happens. I don't know how to say this. You probably want to, at this stage, I mean, if I was in that situation, I'm not sure if I'd have a choice but to do as many hours as I get, especially how expensive it is to live in the UK. And maybe hopefully deal with the problem down the line. I think most people do that, right? Because I don't know what else you're going to do. The postman doesn't stop showing up. Your bills are still there. I'd probably say at this point it's for you to decide for yourself, understand the risks you're taking, and just be aware that technically the rules say you shouldn't be doing it, but is it your fault that your main sponsor doesn't have hours? No. Yeah, there's no right answer to this, I'm afraid.
Thank you, Kevin, for that talk. It's really informative. Thank you so much. I'm asking a question concerning when you're applying for the indefinite leave to remain, should I, as the main applicant, apply first, or should I include all the family members in the application, or how does it go?
First of all, I'd say if you are getting professional help, that should become an easier question because, an answer should be easier because for example, if it's myself, I'd be able to assess and see, are there any issues or reasons why the main applicant wouldn't get indefinite leave to remain? Because if there are, then you don't want to waste money with everybody applying, because if you get refused, they get refused. Indefinite leave to remain currently costs, was it 2,380, something like that, works out to almost 2,400. So if you have a family of 3, multiply that 3 times, so yourself plus maybe the other 3, and if there's a reason you think you could not succeed, or there's some dicey bits or some uncertainties, then you're better off as a main applicant applying first. You get it, because once you get it, they'll get it. So it tends to be more of a practical thing. Also, for most people, having to come up with 2,400 times 2 times 3 times 4 is not easy. So you may just wish to stagger how you do it. Another common thing that does happen is, say you find you're eligible, you apply, you get it, but then you find, I still don't quite have the funds for everybody else. They can renew their stay as a dependent, by the way, even though you got indefinite leave to remain. It's just that it doesn't usually make sense to do another renewal, because a renewal, especially if you're not a health and care visa, will include paying IHS. If you're health and care visa dependent, that's fine. You're not going to pay IHS, it's still going to be £284. So for health and care visa dependents, it makes sense. You may find, I don't have the 2,400 for my spouse and kids, so let's just do a renewal. They'll get another 3 years as you plan your time when you can afford to, to pay the high fees. So for most people, the answer as to whether they should apply together is A, a financial decision, and 2, just being aware whether there's any issues that could affect their ability to succeed. Yep.
All right. There are 2 questions from the YouTube channel, and I think one of it you have dealt with it. It's in relation to the regulations that are changing from the 11th of March. But I will read the next question that says, if you've not been getting jobs from your main sponsor and you have worked more than 20 hours in another place, will it affect you if you wanted to travel home and back?
Okay, I think I'd separate. So that question has 2 parts to it. One is the working more than 20 hours, and the other bit is travel. The bit, first of all, the UK works on they don't really check who's leaving, so you're free to leave at any point in time. Now, coming back tends to be it depends on who you are and who you find, because the only way that you could be questioned is because maybe the border officer becomes aware like something's not right with your sponsor, or something's changed whilst you're away. Or maybe they ask you questions like, where do you work? And instead of saying your sponsor, you say the other company where you're doing 20 hours. So there's nothing I can see you stopping you from traveling. How they would become aware that you're doing more than 20 hours, it has to be something you've said. They don't have a way of automatically checking. When you travel and you come back, they would assume you are still employed and sponsored by your main sponsor, even if you're not getting hours. Now, you have to remember, the way Border Force works is it's very much a game of human assessment. They're the last line of defense. When you show up to the desk and they ask you how you're doing, where have you come from, that kind of thing, they're just assessing you as a person. Are you acting and behaving normally? Anytime they ask more questions tends to be because either they know something about your sponsor, or you're behaving like you're nervous or something. So then they end up interviewing you, and maybe after interview they can ask, can you prove to us that you work for your sponsor? And at that point, if you say you don't have pay slips, or you can't show you have a bank statement, it's a very unusual thing to happen, I'd say that, which can, like I said, it only happens because something, like I've had a scenario where some people have arrived and their sponsor's license has been revoked on the same day, but they don't know. So obviously that creates a problem for those people who've just arrived, having to show like, but I'm employed by this company. So the 20 hours thing, that's your information. Unless you tell somebody about that, I don't see how it affects. The system is not as interconnected as it may seem to be. They don't have instantaneous access to HMRC systems. That's something they have to request. And it has to be requested at a government department level, not I want to see Kevin's tax files. No, it doesn't work like that.
how many, let's say your visa is expiring towards the end of May. Up to how long are you allowed to travel? Is there like a minimum threshold of when you're supposed to, or when you're not supposed to travel outside?
Not a good idea to travel before your visa's coming to an end. I mean, some people don't have a choice. Maybe there's something urgent. If you are a student and you've completed your studies, that would be a problem because technically you've completed what you've come to do. Some students actually do get barred from coming back in. But if you're a skilled worker, technically there's nothing wrong with you traveling. At best, maybe when you come back, you might have some questions like, are you renewing? I can see your visa's coming to an end, that kind of thing. You are allowed to extend for most people, you should normally be applying no more than 28 days before when your visa ends. Technically, as a skilled worker or health and care worker, you can do it at any time, but you have to remember, you don't want to have to get too many certificates to get you to the 5 years. So let me give you an example. Let's say you were given 3 years, and because, say, you need to travel for, 3 months, you decide to apply 3 months early. The next certificate, if it doesn't give you enough time to get you to the 5-year mark, you can sometimes end up in a situation where you are 2 months short of the 5 years. And now you need a new certificate to cover 2 months so that you finish the 5 years, and then, so you can apply for indefinite leave to remain. So it's always, ideally, you should apply within 28 days of when your visa is ending so that you maintain the anniversary of when you would get to 5 years. It's important to negotiate with your employer for the next one that they give you enough time on the COS to get you to 5 years so that you don't have to apply for another one to extend. Top tip that people don't know, technically your 5 years starts from the date of the visa grant in your passport, even though you were not present in the country. So say it was the entry sticker is dated the 3rd of March, but I don't enter the country until, say, the months of April, May, June. I can actually count the 5-year period from the 3rd of March, but they will look at those absences. So some people have an additional advantage there. There's an additional 3 months that you can add there. When you renew your visa and say it takes them a while to decide, you're still legal. It still counts as part of your 5 years because you're physically in the country. So you may find sometimes you renew, and by the time they get it to you, you now only have a year and a half left, to go to indefinite leave to remain, something like that. But just try and follow the 28-day rule, no more than 28 days before, which applies to all other categories. If you're under spouse route, other routes, just try and follow that rule.
Any other question? We can take maybe one more last question if there is.
Okay, maybe just as a clarification, though I kind of know the answer to this. Some of us came in on a tier 5, which we later switched it to tier 2. Would the years spent under the tier 5 count in the indefinite or
Which tier 5? Religious worker or?
Religious.
The answer is no, because those routes don't have settlement. You cannot get indefinite leave to remain under those routes. So any route that doesn't lead to settlement, you can't use that time to combine. The only way you can possibly use that time is, so there's a route called 10 years long residence. If you actually accumulate 10 years worth of successive leave, then you can apply on a different basis. But if you switch to tier, skilled worker, or tier 2 as we called it, chances are you get indefinite leave to remain sooner than you will get to 10 years. It does happen for some people though, for multiple reasons, like maybe you came as a student, going back, got a tier 5, got another one. So then you look at the time with your skilled worker, you find, I might get to 10 years sooner. But that's something that would affect anybody who probably did this from 2014, 2013. It's easier to just focus on the skilled worker route.
Sorry, there's someone who asked whether salary thresholds affect your indefinite leave clearance.
Yes, there is a general salary threshold for indefinite leave to remain, which is for all other visas apart from health and care. Currently it's 26,200. I believe that's going up to 38,000.
Yep.
But for health and care, the current threshold, so the minimum you can be paid for health and care is 20,964 and 80 pence. No, 960. So at the indefinite leave to remain stage, you have to show you're just being paid at least that amount, unless, because every job has what we call the going rate. So the going rate, for example, for a carer could, for argument's sake, be, say, 24,000. But because it's on the shortage occupation list, an employer is actually allowed to pay by 20% less. Now, they are getting rid of that 20%, which means, I believe the new threshold is going to be 23,200. So if you are applying for indefinite leave to remain now, and you're currently being paid 21K, for example, that's fine, but at indefinite leave to remain, you'll have to be showing you paid at least 23,200. So we don't know what future changes could be in terms of the salary threshold, so which is why it's important to get help, or at least get some advice. So whatever the going rate is for your job, you either have to be paid the minimum that is allowed for your job, or the going rate, whichever is higher. So we don't know what's going to change. But at the moment, if you were on 21K, you'd be fine to get indefinite leave to remain.
All right, be there no more questions. We want to appreciate you, Kelvin. Maybe you can tell us where we can reach you for those who want to maybe reach you later with questions or anything they'd like to know, the services, yes?
I mean, usually the best way to get in touch is email or send me a WhatsApp. So if you know somebody who knows me, unfortunately I don't have a business card, but I don't know. If you know somebody who knows me, you can get my details from JS, Helen, anybody, and feel free to reach out. In terms of services, we mainly work with sponsors. However, actually this month we are going to be expanding that to do more personal immigration for individuals and just across all categories, really. So if you find yourself, you ever normally I need to know how can I help. So just email me or WhatsApp me. I will probably, I don't know, I should have put my details there. Yeah, I don't know. Find somebody who knows me, and I'll be more than happy to reach out. I do normally say, because unfortunately my phone rings a lot, send me a WhatsApp if I don't answer, so at least I know who I'm calling back. But other than that, more than happy to interact with anybody who needs to have a chat, needs some help, and we can take it from there. That's on the legal side. Like I said, we do work with businesses. We do a lot of things: recruitment, technology, app, websites, software. We do a lot of things.
All right, help me appreciate Kevin Karue.
Thank you very much. It's been lovely.
You. That was really informative, isn't it? So right now we'll invite our, last but not least, our very own Pastor JS. Please help me appreciate Pastor JS as he comes up stage.
Good evening, everyone. We won't be long. It's already been a very, very long day. I'm just here to just thank every one of you for coming in, for staying in the whole day. For those people who have come in the afternoon, I'm here to just say thank you. Thank you to all our facilitators. Thank you, Ted. Did you like what Ted presented this afternoon? Very informative about education, and I think we'll be glad to have you another time. So be on the lookout for the next one. We will have you on board. And thank you for Ted's mom for giving us this amazing man. And it's such a privilege to have you. And in absentia, there's Slough MP, who has also been very gracious to come to this event. And finally, Kevin, who is, as you can tell, very knowledgeable about the matters we are trying to understand. I'm sure this is helpful to those of us who are here, and we also have another team that is online. And appreciate yourself for coming, because, yeah, appreciate yourself for coming. And on behalf of Pastor Kamau, who is the senior pastor, and Pastor Pauline, who are the senior pastors of Higher Heights Church, I would really, really want to thank every one of you for coming in. Be on the lookout. We'll be able to advertise the other event that we'll be having later in the year, the Life in the UK, because we are on a path to help our people settle in the best way possible. We do not have to, the challenges you experienced, or our predecessors experienced before, the team that is currently coming in doesn't have to go through that journey. And that's why we are intentional about holding these events. We are very intentional about ensuring that the journey becomes as smooth as possible as we continue to help each and every one of us. So thank you so much for coming in. I would just like us, we make a word of prayer, we say the words of grace, and we close for the evening. And let us pray. Father, we thank you for the opportunity to share. We thank you because we know that our journey here is going to be better as you have helped us through the wisdom of the people that have stood here this evening. We thank you for the grace that you've poured upon their lives. We bless them, and we decree and declare that whatever has been sowed tonight, it shall be a help to many people that need it, oh God. It shall be a compass. It shall be a source of direction, a source of, Father God Almighty, guidance that will help many people and will help solve the issues that in the hearts of your people in the name of Jesus. Therefore, we pray for everyone that has come up tonight. We pray for your blessing, and we decree and declare that they are going to experience abundance of your grace. In the mighty name of Jesus Christ, we pray and give thanks. Amen. Amen. Thank you so much. And now may the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, the love of God, the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with us now and forevermore. Amen. Thank you so much for the team that is helping us. If you can help us, you can stack up the chairs. And then for the team that is helping us bring down everything here so that we can clear off in the next few minutes. Thank you so much. God bless you.